Thanks, Paul. Um, we are aware that the president had a lot to talk about last night, but we were really disappointed at the lack of reflection on the youth unemployment crisis. We know that many young people have got the skills to be involved in this infrastructure development, but are sitting without their certificates. There was an article that came out last year that young people have been waiting. There's a backlog from 10 years ago to get young people certified. And without these certificates, they can't prove that they've done the qualification through TVETs. We know that there's a huge backlog at CETAs. We're hearing from people on the ground, learners who have gone through the learnership programs for coding, who are waiting nearly 2 years for their certificate from CETA. So we're really saying that there are serious administrative backlogs that should be easy fixes to unlock these opportunities for young people.
You say you were rather disappointed with what the president spoke of, well, didn't speak of when it comes to youth unemployment. What would you have liked to hear being articulated more aggressively?
So I think we know that in Sona 2020, the president launched the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, and that plans for rollout of that were hampered by COVID. But youth unemployment was a crisis pre-COVID and has become an even more dire situation as a result of lockdown. And so we really thought that the president would have reflected more on how young people are going to be at the center of these economic recovery plans. The economic stimulus package created the latest figures we've been giving are around 300,000 opportunities for young people through teaching assistant positions. But that initial rollout ends at the end of March. There was no indication in the president's speech of whether this stimulus package will continue beyond March and what will happen to these young people. We can't rely solely on government to create all of the opportunities, but what we can ask is where these public employment opportunities have been created, that young people are given the necessary support to be able to use these short-term opportunities to open up doors into a pathway into future employment opportunities. Things like reference letters, the skills that they get, that are transferable skills into other job opportunities, come the end of these short-term stimulus packages.
You mentioned right at the beginning about your disappointment when it comes to the backlog of these certificates not being issued out to young people who have acquired some sort of skill set but are unable to prove it on paper. How much of an impact do you believe that's had, perhaps on the bigger pie, when it comes to youth unemployment?
I think that has a serious knock-on effect. We hear from young people that they're doing entry-level work at in retail stores. So what that means is that those young people are overqualified for these entry-level positions, and other young people who perhaps don't have post-school educations can't access these entry-level opportunities. Things like being a shelf packer or working in retail are entry-level jobs that should provide stepping stones for young people into other employment opportunities, particularly young people who don't have post-school qualifications. However, if those posts are being filled by people who are essentially overqualified, that doesn't leave room for others to access those opportunities. So I think there is a knock-on effect. And we know that the youth unemployment numbers are staggering. The latest stats we have are almost 9 million young people. Imagine what those young people could do if they were earning an income, the stimulus they could give to their local economies, because they would be able to spend money and drive economic growth within their communities. But so long as they are unemployed, they are unable to contribute in that way.
Yesterday, we also heard the president acknowledging the impact of COVID-19 on the education system and the way and the manner in which it disrupted learning. And he's also spoken about how this year he wants to focus on improving the education outcomes. Looking at the situation as it stands with COVID-19 and schools opening on Monday, most of the government schools, what do you imagine then to be the big challenges that perhaps would be being brought forward from last year, continuing into this year when it comes to access to education and material in the face of COVID-19?
What we keep asking for and we keep not getting clarity on, and again, Sona was much of the same, is a clear catch-up strategy. The latest research indicates that it's going to take us 8 years to get back to the level of educational outcomes we were at pre-COVID. That means 8 years of learners going through a system who will be missing fundamentals. How are we going to catch those learners up so that that deficit doesn't continue beyond that? We need a clear plan. We know that COVID waves 3 and 4 are going to hit us. There's no if about it. It's a case of when. And the Department of Basic Education really needs a plan for dealing with these disruptions to ensure that all learners can continue to learn. COVID has really shown the inequality in the education system, which we knew was there before. Resource schools continue to learn online, whereas under-resourced schools, these learners are left behind as usual. How are we putting plans in place to continue learning when learners cannot physically be at school? This is something that we still lack clarity on.
As you look for answers, perhaps asking these questions, we know that Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga will be addressing the media before schools open on Monday. What are some of the pressing concerns that you would like to hear her tackle as she addresses the nation before schools open?
So as I said, a clear catch-up plan. There's been references to ICT. What are the technological advancements that have really been put in place to support learners to continue learning? We haven't had any tangible answers on that. Wraparound support. Young learners are facing a multitude of challenges. We know that at the bare minimum, there's been issues of food insecurity and serious poverty in households. Learners are facing a huge mental burden on top of the pressures of having to catch up on the academic side of things without the support of a teacher. So what systems can schools put in place to try to support young people and give them this wraparound support that they need? And lastly, we were hoping to hear about clear plans for matric second chance programs. We know that learners would have probably fallen behind with COVID last year and are going to need a second chance to complete their matric more so than ever before in this year and next year. So how are we going to make sure that those programs are accessible for the young people who need them?
Very well. Thank you so much for your input and your time, Kristal